Welcome. Professor Jared Rathel here, and this is the final lecture, yay, in your second unit on evolution. So today we're going to be exploring phylogenetics and classification. In other words, how biologists organize and map out evolutionary relationships. But first, I ask you to take a close look at this species that you see before you on your screens. What are you looking at? On the surface, it appears to be a snake, right? But I ask you, can snakes do this? Oh, and by the way, this guy's accent is just a bonus.
That's not poison?
Hey guys, we just found this lizard snake. I don't know exactly what they're called, but it's more like a lizard than anything. And I went to pick him up and he dropped his tail, but his tail's half the length of his body almost. I mean, he dropped it. I wasn't even holding on to that part of him. That is crazy. I wish he wouldn't have. That is crazy. Look at that. I guess he'll be okay since he dropped it himself. I mean, I know lizards drop their tails, but it's not usually that long.
No, it's bleeding.
Clearly, that is not a snake. So snakes can't just shed their tails like you just saw there. Certain species of lizards can drop their tails. It's this last-ditch defense mechanism against predators. So when some lizards feel threatened, they're able to detach their tails. And you noticed on the tail that the nerves were still firing, causing the muscles to twitch, presumably to distract the hungry predator, the fox, right? So that it eats the tail while the business end of the lizard, which contains the brain, makes its getaway to live another day. Fear not, lizards that drop their tails are fully capable of regenerating them using neural stem cells. So what you see before you, definitely not a snake. It's a legless lizard. The scientific name is Ophosaurus ventralis. Its common name is the eastern glass lizard. They call them glass lizards because their tails break off like glass shatters. So these guys, there's four species. They live in the southeastern United States. And if you take a closer look at them, they've got some other telltale characteristics that indicate they're actually a lizard. So they've got visible external ears, like you see here. There's a little ear hole. Snakes don't have external ears. They feel sound waves. They feel the vibrations of sound. Also, this legless lizard has an eyelid. You can see right there. Snakes don't have eyelids. Their eyes are covered by a transparent scale. So my point is that superficial morphology, the form, the morphology on the surface can be deceiving to those untrained in biology. The glass lizard, clearly a lizard and not a snake. This is a phylogenetic tree. So it maps out evolutionary relationships among lineages. Leglessness, the loss of limbs, evolves independently at least twice in the reptiles. Here in the lineage that we know as the true snakes, and then here independently in this branch of species that we call the glass lizards. So in spite of looking a lot like snakes on the surface, glass lizards are actually much more closely related to the monitors. It's more appropriate to think about them as legless monitors. So they share a recent common ancestor with the monitor lizards here. So what drives the loss of limbs? Both of these lineages, the glass lizards and the snakes, they've converged on a similar ecological niche. Both of these groups of species are hunting small prey, things like arthropods and amphibians and rodents that live in the leaf litter. Therefore, natural selection has exerted similar selection pressures on two very genetically distinct lineages, but produced similar morphology. It's a great example of convergent evolution. So I know that phylogeny is kind of a funky word. It just implies the evolutionary history of a species or groups of species. So evolutionary relationships are most commonly illustrated using phylogenetic trees, which we're going to talk about quite a bit in this lecture, very similar to what Darwin was sketching in those secret notebooks. Okay, so think about this. How would you describe the species that you see on your slide? It's large-bodied, it's got spots, it's got retractable claws, it's got a compressed rostrum, like we talked about in the very beginning. Let's see, it's got long, sharp canine teeth and these carnassial teeth for shearing meat. Indicates it's a carnivore, right? It's covered in hair. It's endothermic, meaning it maintains a constant body temperature. It gives birth to live young, and it nourishes those kittens with nutritious milk produced from mammary glands. This species shares lots of these same characteristics with this entire group of species that you see before you, including the caracal here on the top left, the clouded leopard, the lynx, cheetah, tiger, and lion. So understanding phylogeny, the evolutionary relationships of branches on the tree of life, begins with classification. And we certainly remember Linnaeus and his taxonomic system of binomial nomenclature. So the common name for this species is the leopard, but common names can lead to lots of confusion, right? There's leopards in Africa and across India. So this species is actually more precisely classified as Panthera pardus, where pardus is the species and Panthera is the genus. The genus that includes the large cats, the tiger, lion, jaguar, leopard, and snow leopard. It's in the family Felidae, the cat family, the carnivores with retractable claws, large eyes with binocular vision, large, very sensitive ears, this vomeronasal organ, which actually allows cats to taste the air, the family Felidae. The felids are in the order Carnivora. They're meat eaters. And I'll show you a phylogenetic tree of the Carnivora here in just a second. The leopard is a mammal in the class Mammalia, meaning they nurse their young with mammary glands, they're endothermic, they have 3 middle ear bones, and they have a skull, a synapsid skull, which is characteristic of mammals today. They are members of the phylum Chordata, which includes the vertebrates, animals with a backbone. All the chordates have a flexible rod called a notochord that supports their dorsal nerve cord called the spinal cord in vertebrates. Of course, Panthera pardus is in the kingdom Animaliae, which means it's heterotrophic. It can't make its own food, and it's multicellular. Finally, it's in the domain Eukarya, meaning it's composed of eukaryotic cells, large, complex cells with membrane-bound organelles. So when we classify an organism like a leopard, we're going to start broad at the most inclusive level of classification, now the domain. And then we move to kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, down to species. We're becoming more and more exclusive with each grouping. What I mean by that, as we move from kingdom down to phylum all the way down to species, we're going to become more and more exclusive. So at the very top here, we have the kingdom Animalia. So these are multicellular heterotrophs, the vast majority of which digest food in an internal cavity. This doesn't include any of the autotrophic plants or the single-celled protists or the fungi that move by growing towards resources. As we move from kingdom to phylum, we're going to get rid of this invertebrate, this echinoderm that never develops a notochord during the course of its development. As we move from phylum to class, we're now going to eliminate this reptile, this snake, which is ectothermic and lays eggs. As we move from class to order, we're going to eliminate this adorable chipmunk, which is primarily herbivorous. When we move from Carnivora to the family Ursidae, we're eliminating the red fox, which is not part of the bear family. As we move to the genus Ursus, these are sometimes called the true bears. So the panda bear is very distantly related to the rest of the bears. The lineage that is to become the giant panda splits from the lineage that is to become the genus Ursus not long after the divergence in the lineage that is to become the raccoons and the red pandas. And then finally, we get down here to the species level. This is Ursus arctos, the grizzly bear, or the brown bear. So I want you to take a moment before moving on, and I want you to come up with some sort of mnemonic so that you can remember the hierarchical classification system used in biology. So I always remember King Philip came over for good spaghetti. That's what was taught to me years ago, and it's stuck and it works. So take a moment and come up with a mnemonic. Okay, my next big point is that superficial appearances can be greatly misleading when we're thinking about evolutionary relationships. Remember the garter snakes and the glass lizards from the very beginning. Consider these two lineages. We have a dolphin on the top and a great white shark on the bottom. They both look, at least on the surface, very, very similar. Both of these organisms have streamlined body shapes with dorsal and pectoral fins that allows them speed and agility in aquatic environments. Both the dolphin and the great white shark have counter shading, where they're dark on top and light on the bottom, so they blend in. They camouflage from prey and potential predators, whether the organism is below them looking up or above them looking down. Both of these are very effective hunters. So they probably share a recent common ancestor, right? Like the polar bear and the grizzly bear. At the very least, they're probably in the same family like all of those cats that we saw before. Probably shaking your head now. Not even close. So the dolphin, a cetacean, is a mammal like you and I with lungs. The shark is a cartilaginous fish with gills. Its ancestors have never walked on terra firma. The dolphin shares much, much more genetic material with you and I than it does with that shark. So this phenomenon when two independent evolutionary lineages that aren't necessarily closely related genetically at all, when they converge on a similar form, this is what we call convergent evolution. Oftentimes, the different lineages will inhabit similar ecological niches. Thus, they're subject to the same selection pressures. For example, countershading evolved independently in both of these different lineages because both of these lineages now live in the same aquatic environment. And countershading provides a selective advantage, whether you're a mammal or a cartilaginous fish. So this is a broad phylogenetic tree which illustrates the evolutionary relationships between the vertebrates. So the first branch that comes off of this tree is the cartilaginous fishes, what are known as the chondrichthyes. So here's the lineage that is to produce the chondrichthyes, which is the sharks, skates, and rays. This lineage here is what produces the cetaceans, the dolphins, and the whales. And as you can see, these whales and dolphins are more closely related to elephants and other mammals, and even to reptiles and amphibians than they are to the cartilaginous fishes. So in order to get to this divergence right here, this node, you've got to go back 400 million years before you find a recent common ancestor for the chondrichthyes and the mammals. So when building a phylogenetic tree, we always start with Linnaean classification. We're going to hone in now on the order Carnivora. This is obviously a simplified phylogenetic tree, but it shows the relative relatedness of three families of carnivores. The Felidae, the cat family on the top, which of course includes our leopard. The Mustelidae, or the weasel family, which includes species like the badger, the wolverine, the pine marten and fisher, as well as the otters. And then the Canidae, the dog family, which includes coyotes, wolves, foxes. So node number 1 here shows us that the Mustelidae and the Canidae are more closely related to each other than they are to the Felidae. Secondly, node number 2 here shows us that the coyote and the wolf are very closely related, that they share a recent common ancestor. So some terminology that shows up on your next assessment: closely related species like the coyote and the wolf are what we call sister taxa, like B and C here on this example. They split relatively recently. They share a recent common ancestor. The basal taxon, and a taxon is a single lineage, taxa is plural. The basal taxon represents the most distantly related lineage in the group of lineages that you're comparing. The basal taxon is a great point of comparison because it helps us root that tree. It helps us understand where the first big divergence occurs. So if you think about this example phylogenetic tree, maybe it represents the class Mammalia. So this big split right here at number 2, this might be the placental mammals and the marsupial mammals, right? Which what we talked about, that ancient split when Pangea breaks up, when we talked about biogeography. This, the basal taxon in that little example, would be those weird egg-laying mammals mammals, the duck-billed platypus and the echidna, which we call the monotremes. So this week, you're going to do a virtual laboratory. It's really cool. You're going to look at the evolution of anole lizards in the Caribbean. If you've never seen an anole, come into the lab on 125 anytime, and I can show you the anoles. We have some Bahamian anoles that we keep in the lab. So all throughout the islands of the Caribbean, we see similar anole ecomorphs that live on different islands. So for example, in both Puerto Rico and in Jamaica, we see these large green anoles that live way up high in the tree canopy. Similarly, here on Cuba and in Puerto Rico, we see species of anoles that have tiny little legs that well equip these species to hunt on small twigs. So the question then arises, do those short-legged anoles have short legs because it's a homologous structure? Do they have those short legs because they share a recent common ancestor who had short limbs, and their short limbs result from this shared ancestry? Or have short limbs evolved independently in different lineages on different islands, like the glass lizard and the garter snake? So in this virtual lab, you're going to be exploring Caribbean anole lizard evolution and thinking about whether the evidence suggests that the shared structures are homologous or analogous. And how are you going to do that? You're going to use the most powerful tool that evolutionary biologists have in their arsenal today to tease out these relationships. You're going to use DNA sequences to examine molecular homologies. So looking at the amount of shared DNA in these different lizard lineages to build your own phylogenetic trees and understand why these islands are such amazing evolutionary laboratories. So good luck on the virtual lab. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Please reach out to me if you have questions or technical difficulties. Thanks.